A woman in Ohio makes dinner in 1974 and a bowl of white rice goes on the table, because rice goes with what she made, the way it always has. Her husband looks at it for a second longer than a man looks at a side dish. Then he says he is not hungry, and he goes out to the garage and she hears him not doing anything out there for about 20 minutes. He is 32 years old. He has a job and a mortgage and 2 kids and a lawn. He has never once told her that for a year of his life, the smell of rice cooking meant a village, and a village meant a decision, and some of those decisions are still with him. He never will. What he will do quietly for the next 50 years is not eat rice, and she will learn to stop making it without either of them ever saying a word about why. Today we are going into the strangest wound that came home from that war, the one with no scar and no paperwork. Why the most ordinary food on earth became impossible for a share of the men who came back. The 3 completely different reasons it happened, because they are not the same reason, and only one of them is the one people assume. What memory does with smell that it does not do with anything else, which is the mechanism at the center of this file. The men it worked in reverse for, who came home craving exactly what everyone expected them to hate. And the quiet way American kitchens rearranged themselves around men who would not explain. If this is worth your time, a like helps push it in front of the men who lived it. And tell me in the comments where in the world you are watching from. I read every one of them. Start with the size of the thing, because rice was not a side dish in that country. Rice was the country. It grew in the paddies the men waded through chest deep and slept beside. It was in every village they entered and every hooch they searched. It was what the enemy carried, cooked, and lived on, and finding a cache of it in a bunker complex was a tactical event that got reported up the chain. It was payment. It was currency. It was the thing families hid and the thing units burned. A rifleman in that war was never more than a few hours from rice in some form for 12 or 13 months without a break. That is the first thing to understand. This was not a man getting sick of a food. This was a food that had been the wallpaper of the worst year of his life. Now the 3 reasons, because they get collapsed into one and they are not one. The first reason is the simplest and the least interesting, and it is the one most people assume covers the whole thing. Some men simply ate it until they could not stand it. Rice showed up in rations, in mess halls, in anything bought or traded locally. 12 months of anything will do that to a person, and plenty of men came home with an ordinary, uncomplicated, permanent boredom with rice that has nothing traumatic about it at all. If that was your father, that is the whole story, and it is a perfectly good one. The second reason is the one nobody expects, and it is physical. We covered the water on this channel and the food and what the inside of a man in that country was going through. Dysentery and parasites were near universal experiences. A significant share of those men had at least one violent, memorable episode of being sick from something they ate or drank, and a meaningful number of those episodes happened with rice in their stomach, because rice was what was in everybody's stomach. The human body has a specific and very old piece of machinery for this. Eat something, get violently ill within a certain window, and the brain forms a link that is almost impossible to argue with afterward. It is not a preference, and it is not a belief. It is a hardwired protective circuit, and it can be built in a single event, and it does not care whether the food was actually to blame. A man can know, intellectually, for 50 years that the rice was innocent and the water was guilty. His stomach never got that memo. That is why some of these men describe not disliking rice, but being unable to eat it. There is a difference, and the men who have it know exactly what it is. The third reason is the one this file is really about, and it is the smell. Here is the mechanism, and it is worth the 2 minutes because it explains a great deal more than rice. Almost everything you perceive goes through a relay station in the middle of your brain before it gets sorted, labeled, and filed. Sight, sound, touch, all of it takes that route. Smell does not. Smell has a private door. It runs almost directly into the oldest parts of the brain, the ones that handle emotion and memory, and it arrives before the thinking part of you has been consulted. That is why a smell can put a grown man somewhere else before he has any say in it. Not remind him, put him there. The feeling arrives first and complete, and the explanation, if it ever comes, arrives several seconds later and is usually wrong. Now give that machinery a year of Vietnam. Cooking rice has a specific smell, and it is not a small one. In that country, it was the smell of villages at dusk, of hooches with cook fires going, of the exact places and moments where a 19-year-old had to decide who was a farmer and who was not, with seconds to spare and no way to be sure. It was the smell in the air during the best and the worst hours of his tour, indiscriminately, because the smell was everywhere and the hours were mixed, so the file gets written. Not by him. Nobody chooses this, and then 20 months or 10 years later, a pot of rice goes on a stove in Ohio, and the steam comes up, and the private door opens, and a man who was fine 2 minutes ago is standing in his own kitchen with his heart going like he ran up a hill, feeling something enormous that he cannot name and would not be able to explain if his wife asked. Stand in it for a second, because the men this happened to describe it with a precision that tells you how many times they have gone over it. You are in your own kitchen. It is a weeknight. You are holding a beer and half listening to something in the other room, and you are, by any measure anyone could apply, fine. The lid comes off a pot 4 feet away, and the steam finds you. And there is a gap, about 1.5 seconds long, where your body has already made a decision and you have not been informed of it. Your shoulders are up. Your breathing changed. You are scanning a kitchen you have lived in for 6 years, and part of you is reading the doorways and the window the way you were taught to read a tree line, and none of this was authorized by you. Then the 1.5 seconds ends and you come back, and you are a grown man standing on linoleum holding a beer. Nothing happened. Nobody saw anything. The whole event lasted less time than it takes to sneeze, and there is no version of it you could describe out loud that would not make you sound insane. So you say you are not hungry, and you go find something to do with your hands until the house stops smelling like it. That is the entire injury. It costs a man about 90 seconds a week for 50 years, and it never once shows up on a form. Which is why she learned not to ask. Here is what that looked like from the other side of the table. Because the families are half this story, and they never got told anything. She notices he does not touch it. She makes it less often, then not at all. If she is like a great many wives of that generation, she never receives an explanation, because he does not have one to give, and because the men of that era had been raised by men who did not explain things either. We made a whole file on this channel about those fathers and what they could not say to their sons. The sons came home and did the same thing in a different key about a bowl of rice. The children grow up in a house with a rule nobody stated. We do not have rice here. They do not think about it. Every house has its rules. Some of those kids are in their 50s now, and a few of them are going to learn tonight from this file why their mother stopped making something. There is a version of this in a great many houses, and it is not always rice. For some men it was fish sauce, or any strong fish smell at all, which made a whole category of restaurants impossible for 40 years. For some it was diesel, which is a problem in a country built on it, and which we touched on in the file about the men who burned the latrines, because that smoke was diesel and human waste together, and it went into the fabric of everything they owned. For some it was wet canvas, which is a tent, a truck cover, a duffel bag, and a poncho all at once. For some it was cut grass in high summer, because a hot green smell with humidity behind it is not a memory of a lawn. And for a share of them, it was the sound of a helicopter, which is not a smell at all but works the same way, which is why so many of those men will tell you they look up. Every time, still, rice is just the most common and the most domestic of them. It is the one that had a standing appointment at the dinner table in front of the children on ordinary Tuesdays for decades. Now the honest complication, because this file does not get to be a clean story. It ran the other way for a great many men. Rice was not only the enemy's food, it was the food of allies, interpreters, housegirls, ARVN counterparts, and the families in villages where units were welcomed and fed. Men who spent time with Vietnamese people, and there were many, came home with the opposite condition entirely. They wanted the food. They learned to cook it. They married into it. A share of that generation came back and spent decades hunting for a fish sauce that tasted like the one they remembered and got emotional about it, in the good way, for the rest of their lives. Same smell, same private door. Opposite file attached, and there is a third group, smaller and stranger than either, worth a line of its own. Men who could not eat it at home, at their own table, with their own family, and could eat it without any trouble at all in a Vietnamese restaurant, among strangers with the language going on around them. That sounds like a contradiction. And it is not. The door does not open on the food. It opens on the whole scene. A kitchen in Ohio in 1974 is a place where a man is supposed to be safe and finished, and a father, and the smell arriving there is an intrusion into a life that is not supposed to contain it. The same smell in a room that already sounds and looks like where it came from is not an intrusion. It is where it belongs, and the man is a visitor, and visitors are allowed to be there, which tells you the thing has less to do with rice than with the collision. It was never the food. It was the food showing up in the wrong life. That is the part that makes the mechanism real rather than sentimental. Smell does not carry meaning. It carries whatever was happening when you learned it. Two men, same country, same year, same steam, rising off the same grain, and one of them goes to the garage while the other one goes looking for a Vietnamese restaurant in Kansas. If you served, or you are the son, daughter, or widow of a man who did, it is worth knowing that the things that came home without paperwork are exactly the ones the rules have moved most on, and they have moved more in the last 4 years than in the previous 40. I put together a plain English file on what those rules actually say now. Link is in the description and the pinned comment. Now the last part, because this is not really a file about food. Everything else that came home from that war announced itself. The knee announced itself. The hearing announced itself, and we made a file about the men who lost it and were never once asked about it. The bad nights announced themselves loudly enough that families organized around them. This one never announced anything. It disguised itself as a preference. That is what makes it the strangest injury of that war. A man could carry it for half a century and never once file it under the war. It looked like pickiness. It looked like a habit. It got explained away at 1,000 dinner tables with a shrug and the words, "I just do not care for it," which is the most efficient sentence in the English language for closing a subject. And behind that sentence, in a share of those houses, was a 19-year-old standing at the edge of a village at dusk with the smell of somebody's supper in the air, making a decision he would carry for the rest of his life, while a bowl of rice on a table in Ohio waited 50 years to bring it back. Go back to the kitchen. The woman clearing a full bowl off the table without comment. The man in the garage not doing anything for 20 minutes. 2 people, 1 marriage, and a piece of information that never once crossed the 3 feet between them. She stopped making it. He never explained, and that arrangement, unspoken, worked for both of them for 50 years, which is either the saddest thing in this file or the most loving one, and it is probably both. If your house had a food that disappeared, I want to know what it was, and I want it from either chair. Veterans, what could you not eat when you came back? And did it ever come back to you? And to the wives, the sons and the daughters, what did your mother stop making? And did you ever find out why? I suspect the comments under this one are going to be a list of the quietest things that generation brought home. The best account here becomes a future file, and that is literal. Several videos on this channel started as a comment from a man who was there. If this was worth your time, leave a like, because it puts this in front of more people who lived on both sides of that kitchen table. Share it with somebody who grew up in a house with a rule nobody ever explained. And subscribe for more of what did not make it into the textbooks. One more thing before I go. If any of this sounded like your house, the presumption rules today are not what most people think, and old silence is not the end of it. The plain English file is linked in the description and pinned below. To the men who came home and quietly rearranged their own kitchens around 1 year of their lives, and to the women who noticed and adjusted and never once asked them to explain it. This one was for you.